So I just wanted to um, expand on and maybe conclude just a little bit the discussion we had in our first class of English 222, which is, as you know, a survey course on English Canadian literature. We were talking about English Canadian cultural nationalism and trying to establish, at least to start with, some kind of basis for understanding what might constitute a canon of Canadian literature. The history, if you want to think about it this way, of the production of what we called canlit. When did this come into being? I suggested that it was in reaction to, this is not exclusively true, but it was in large part in reaction, at least critically, at least in terms of university and high school courses and things like that, in reaction to the Canadian Centennial, the Centennial of Confederation in 1967. I've had us read a couple of pages from the Conclusion to Literary History of Canada by Northrop Frye, and you'll see the dates of publication are 1965 and with a revision in 1971. So that sort of circles around Confederation, the Centennial of Confederation, and everything that was going on in the country. The Glenn Gould piece you're going to listen to for next class, the idea of North, also emerges in this time period, as does Margaret Atwood's book Survival. That's 1972, I think, 71, 72. So there were all these efforts to try and decide a number of years ago what it was that constituted a Canadian voice, or as Northrop Frye says, our sort of national consciousness, a kind of cultural imaginary, how we think of ourselves, how we imagine ourselves, how we pull ourselves together. Some words came up around this. I put up the term unceded because of an acknowledgement that I certainly feel obliged to make, that here on the UBC campus we're operating on the ancestral, traditional, and unceded territories of the Musqueam people. So when we think about that idea of land or of territory being unceded and being connected to tradition as well, a tradition that may or may not be our own, depending on our own backgrounds, how we relate to particular kinds of tradition. And I wanted us to see the connection to a sense of place, or really in this case, a sense of displacement. Citizenship seems to, at least in an English-Canadian context, seems to tie itself quite strongly to concepts of settlement, of colonization, and also of migration, immigration, of refuge, of the welcoming of refugees and other populations of displaced persons, as well as certain conceptions of indigeneity, so that belonging in place in a Canadian context is often a very complex set of negotiations, sometimes that we perform without even thinking about it. So in some ways, the readings I'm having us do, at least in a literary or cultural context, are reminders of, or at least provocations about, that sense of belonging, whether one can or cannot belong. We played the John K. Samson song, Highway 1 West, and noted the chorus that his car, or it's at least we have the metaphor of a car broken in that song, in the lyrics, broken down on the Trans-Canada Highway somewhere outside of Winnipeg. And the singer, the voice, the persona in the song, whom you'll notice never identifies him or herself, probably a himself, but him or herself as an I. The word I, the first person pronoun, doesn't actually occur in the song. Is kind of complaining that it's too far to walk anywhere from here. And it's that sense of here, the last word in the lyrics, or the kind of climactic piece of vocabulary in the chorus of the song that keeps being repeated. That word here reminds us of the complexity of one's relationship to place. And notice that the voice, the person in the song, the persona is walking away from here, or here is a space of alienation, of collapse, of broken media, of uncertainty. In John K. Samson's sort of vocabulary, we might suggest it's a place of weakness. His band was called the Weaker Thans. So the question of belonging in place is raised really by that song. And we're provoked perhaps to think about how we do or do not belong to the community of listeners that the song goes out to. And our own sense of what it might mean to be an our, to be a we, to be a collective, to be a community, to be a nation, starts to be called into question. So that's why I had us kind of listen to that song. The other thing we should maybe, we're going to talk about this next class, but the other thing we should maybe start to pay attention to comes from Northrop Frye's essay, just the beginning paragraph of the excerpt that you have in your anthology, in the Moss and Sugars anthology. He says, it seems to me, here I'm reading from my book, right, there we go. He says, it seems to me that Canadian sensibility, that is how one perceives oneself as a Canadian, has been profoundly disturbed, not so much by our famous problem of identity. So when this is being written then as now, there's often a kind of reflex among the Canadian citizenry to ask, what does it mean to be a Canadian, who we are. So this is the famous problem of Canadian identity, English Canadian identity in particular. So when we ask ourselves, Frye says, who am I? For him, and this is a really, well, at least within Canadian literary and cultural studies, a really famous kind of question that he asks. He says, we tend not to ask so much, who am I? But rather, he calls it a riddle, where is here? And so where is here? That word here that we hear, H-E-A-R, in John K. Samson's lyric, is drawn out in some sense, or at least echoes Northrop Frye's question. Notice that what I was going to say is notice that the Frye text is in quotation marks, that it's iterative. It's something that he's kind of generally quoting from what he hears around him. If you skip back to the John K. Samson song and look at the beginning, I said among other things, the poem, the song lyrics, as they're presented on the page, seem to be about a breakdown on the highway, about a car broken down, and we hear the car radio and so on. But if you look at it, the car is actually a metaphor for the failing of words. Here's his book here. You can look this lyric up if you can, but it starts off with a sort of in the middle of things with a conjunction, and the first string of single word or two-word line says, and it didn't take long for the words to slow. So what's happening is that there's a bit of a self-awareness of how it is that we speak, how we articulate ourselves. So notice in the Frye essay again that it's a quotation. It's voiced inside the essay. Someone is asking him or herself, where is here? In the Samson song, the words are like a car that's breaking down. Words are failing him. He can't decide how it sounds like. Even though there are words in the song, he does find some set of words, but those words call themselves into question. They're sort of unsteady and uncertain. If we skip ahead to the Robert Hayman poem, from Quodlibets that I asked you to read. Remember that this is very old stuff. It's from around Shakespeare's time. The poems themselves in that collection make reference to John Donne, and they're published in 1628. So this is Jacobean, late Elizabethan, Jacobean is the right term, Jacobean, Carolinian poetry, so the early 17th century. And one of the things you'll notice is that Hayman's poem also has a claim to place. It has a very interesting and a little bit convoluted kind of phrasing at the end, where he asks if there could be any place better than here, is how you might transliterate it. But he says, "I'd rather live no other where." No other where. And notice that he says, in rhyming that I do declare, he says I say. So just as with the Samson song, where there's an awareness of speaking or of words or of voicing one's sense of displacement or uncertainty about here, and in the Frye essay you have someone questioning where is here, Frye himself asking that and sort of turning that question into an identity statement. Canadians are the ones who ask, where is here, who engage with place in this complicated manner for Frye. So too with Hayman, who was the governor of an English colony at Harbour Grace in Newfoundland. You'll notice the poem refers to Newfoundland and is really an invitation to come and live in the colony, the English colony on the island of Newfoundland. You'll notice that that poem too, as I was saying, also really forcefully as it can, and as positively as it can, declares, says, articulates this sense of place. But it's a place that, although a sense of place that, although celebratory, is actually articulated in the negative, and with a kind of alterity, a kind of otherness. So he doesn't say here; he says no other where. That idea of otherwhere might be something to hold on to. So rather than here, in a poem that really emerges at the very beginnings of Canadian literature in English, certainly according to Margaret Atwood, this is the case in her anthology of Canadian verse from Oxford, Hayman sort of has to talk around the colonizer, the settler's sense of both being in place, of having to place himself, and of being uncertain as to what might constitute that place. We seem to inhabit uncertainties and displacements in a rather peculiar way in Hayman's, well, awkward and kind of provocative poem. All right, we'll see you in class, I guess, tomorrow, and we'll talk further about Hayman and Northrop Frye, and we'll also be looking at Glenn Gould's The Idea of North, another way, another instance of asking these same kinds of questions about place and about national imaginary and national consciousness.